Seems like I was muted. We're off to a great start. We love it. Okay. All right. So what I was saying is welcome back to Get Good with Git. We are teaching you how to use Git hands-on and super informative. And we want to make sure that you have a good time. I saw that you just got off stream with Oracle, so I know you might be running around getting things together. Just want to make sure that you get a chance to check in before we really get rolling, recognizing that y'all have a very busy day ahead of you. Which is to say I have a busy day because I'm hopping on and off a couple times in the next 2 days especially. But thanks so much for joining. Don't stress about that QR code. It just jumps straight to our mlh.io site. So if you haven't checked us out, feel free to pull that up in the background. But I think at this point we've gone through enough time that folks who are waiting for that ad break should be jumping in. So why don't we jump in? To start us off, let me tell you about myself. My name is Cecilia. I'm here at Major League Hacking as a coach, and I just defended my PhD on hackathons. We can definitely chat more about that at the very end or in any of my streams, because right now we are here to get good. So a few notes before we get started is obviously thank you so much for attending. I know the beginning of the week is super intense because you want to get all that knowledge and make sure you're good to go for all the challenges that you have this week. So as a quick overview, what we'll be doing in this workshop is we'll talk a little bit more about GitHub, get you access to the GitHub Student Developer Pack, learn about version control systems, explore Git, of course, and then we'll walk through actually using it, which is a great way to, again, tackle some of those challenges and even start thinking about collaborating with others, which I know this community is super good at. Hello. Feel free to drop questions in chat as we go through this workshop. I am more than happy to take a quick pause, explain it, make sure you're up to speed. Just because I explain things one way does not mean it has to always be explained that way. So feedback is super helpful to ensure you have the best experience possible. Now, exploring Git and GitHub. Git is cool and GitHub is cooler. I'm biased. I have to say I really do love GitHub over all the other version control system like layers on top, but that's just my opinion. So GitHub is a cloud platform for code collaboration. It uses Git, so think of it like Git is some stuff that helps you track changes to your code, use various tools. Think of it like the Google Docs history feature, or being able to hit like undo on like various stages of your code at a time. And then GitHub is on top of it, where it allows you to save your repositories or folders of projects. And it has plenty of other tools and counting. And we'll go over a little bit of that in just a moment. But yes, I have to agree, GitHub is also superior because it has Mona, the Octocat, which I don't think you can see currently in my very tiny window into my office. But I have 3 Mona plushies hanging around in my office, courtesy of GitHub. But let's keep going. As you can see, like there's quite a bit you can do with it, but we haven't really got into the details. And so our goal is to get you optimally using Git in the next hour. So quite a bit of content, but again, definitely ask questions. I love questions. It makes sure that I know who's paying attention and what people need help with. And maybe in the future, if you find that you need to come back to this recording, there's probably an answer for you. But if you find that you are still looking for resources or you want to make sure that you can practice it and get ready to go, consider checking out the mlh.link/gettrained repo to do the official training manual on getting used to Git, or check out the cheat sheet at mlh.link/git. And I love that my community is already showing up, giving you those links in the comments. We love that, doing some of my job for me, certainly making it easier. Let me go ahead and remove that check-in link because by now you should have checked in. Awesome. So why even use GitHub? Well, there are plenty of benefits to using GitHub over just Git, especially over other platforms. And again, I'm biased, but GitHub has a lot to offer, namely GitHub Copilot, which we'll have another workshop on if you'd like to learn how to use AI in generating your code, solving problems together with your buddy, pair programmer, if you will, and plenty more. Now, other things that there are available are like GitHub Actions if you start getting into continuous integration and continuous deployment. Maybe you're interested in the apps that GitHub has to offer, which we'll actually go through a few of those, which is the GitHub CLI, Desktop, and GitHub Mobile. And depending on whether you're working with other folks, GitHub is great for collaboration, where it gives you different types of places to collaborate on, from teams to organizations to the roles you might hold to running your own code reviews, which is a great way to make your code that much better, as well as the people that you work with. And my personal favorite, if you happen to be a student actively currently, high school, boot camp, community college, university, etc., consider joining the GitHub Education Student Developer Pack and learning more about what we have to offer there. But as you can see, there's quite a bit. This is a very busy screen. We'll talk a little bit about some of these. First, the Student Developer Pack. This gives you access to so much, which as a student, you get access to a lot of these things for free, or you get to trial things out. So if you decide that you are interested, which I highly recommend, check out mlh.link/GitHub, where you can, again, community is on it. We love that. Thank you so much. So here's that link for y'all if you want to go ahead and type that in and head over. This will start you getting access to it. And so there's more than just GitHub Copilot, which again, future workshop, if you're curious, I highly recommend, especially if you are currently on your own. It can be the pair programmer at 2 a.m. when no one else is awake. But you can also have experiences, access to code spaces, and even campus experts, which are developer relations and leaders in your community. And if there isn't one, maybe you should become one. But the Student Developer Pack has more than just that. There are access to tools, access to courses, tutorials, resources, and plenty more. So if you find that you want access to something that you normally would have had to pay for, chances are the Student Developer Pack has a way to give you access, if not temporarily, then for a very long time for free. Once upon a time ago, I think I got Azure credit. I think that might still be available for your first time offer. You know, everybody wants credits these days. But let's get into more about version control. Actually, quick pause. If you do decide to sign up for the Student Developer Pack right here, right now, it will ask you to provide evidence that you are currently a student. So it'll ask you for a picture of your ID, if you happen to have one. And if that ID does not have an expiration date, such as like, oh, my ID expires in 4 years, whatever it may be, you will need to submit instead, because it will follow up and ask you a picture of your transcript. Basically something to say that you're actively taking classes in this current semester. So as long as you have enough evidence there, then you should be good to go. Okay, we can unpause now. Coming back to learning how to use Git. So why should you use version control systems like Git? Well, version control allows multiple people to simultaneously work on a single project. So consider again, you're using Git Google Docs and everybody's editing at the same time. And while chaotic, it's pretty manageable. It's very visual. It's very responsive. Now, when you're coding, there is, code spaces and other ways to collaborate with folks on the code document itself. But what about when you're working on a feature independently and your friend is working on a feature independently? Git and version control allow you to manage that properly without being interrupted by your friend. Because let's be honest, running code that your friend is actively editing while you're trying to test your own function, that's not possible. Not without a lot of difficulty. And so this ends up helping out in controlling some of that isolation that you need in order to work with things, and then actually, of course, merge the code together later when both things are functional. Now, there's a bunch of keywords that I want to teach you today that we'll use throughout this presentation to help you get a better understanding. So if we look on the very left, we have this purple box that says working dir. This refers to working directory, which is where you are currently doing things. And when you are, wow, chat is super active today. Looks like people are catching up. You know what? That's the beginning of Global Hack Week. It totally is a great time to socialize. But right, so we have working directory where somebody might be actively working on their files. They're adding a feature, a function, whatever. And so in order to stage things as if to hit save, in order that other people might be able to have access to those changes, you would then stage things. So the staging area is where you've added the things that you're changing and you're preparing them to package them up, if you will, into a commit message. And this commit is meant to summarize what it is that you are packaging up for other folks to know. So let's say you're working with your friend and you want to tell them, hey, these are the things that I've worked on, these files that I've touched to add the functionality for a specific feature. Well, of course, if you're working next to them, you can just say, hey, I pushed this feature. But if they're not next to you, it's important to have good commit messages. And of course, you also want to make sure that when you have these commit messages, that if it's just you working with you, when you come back later, you're like, what is this commit message that says, I don't know? Well, of course I don't know. Now I have to go look at the files. So commit messages are also messages to your future self. And so you're working in a local repository. And once you merge everything, everything's packaged together. This is a very gross oversimplification. I just want to expose you before we really get into it. And then when you move from your local repository, when you stage things on your desktop, your laptop, wherever it is that you are working from, you push things up to your remote repository, where the remote repository is kind of like the cloud in the sky, the folder in the sky, or your GitHub repository. And so that way your friend can pull things down to have access to those changes. And so another little quick equation here, which is very, very helpful, is that if you happen to deconstruct what happens on a git pull, it's actually a mix of a merge and a fetch. And again, we'll get into this more as we actually try this out. Again, giving you exposure to the terminology that we're going to use before we actually go ahead and use it. And I want to do a quick pause and check in. Anybody confused? Anybody have questions just yet? I'll go ahead to the next slide. There is a bit of a delay, so. The sun is extremely warm right now, actually. I'm not seeing any questions jumping in yet, but maybe you're thinking about it, so I'll keep going. But if you do have a question, I am checking chat actively. Feel free to drop it in there. It is no trouble at all to pause, quickly turn around, and make sure that you are answered. So in Git, everyone gets a working copy. And so I just mentioned that in the last slide, but another way to consider it is your snapshot. And a repository has multiple snapshots. Another way to think about this is save files or a timeline of saves, different ways to refer to it. Then as you make changes, you're adding your revisions to the staging area. So remember, we're figuring out what it is that we've made changes to. So maybe I touched files A, B, and C, and I want to bundle them up. So that way, after I add them to the staging area, I can then bundle them into a commit message where others will have no access to the code until you push up your changes to a remote repository. In order for them to access those changes, remember they need to pull down. So let's start from the beginning because that was a lot in like 3 sentences. So when you're working on your local instance, your local copy, your desktop, your laptop, however it is that you are currently coding through Visual Studio Code or through Notepad++ or however you prefer to write your code, that is your local repository, your local folder. And your working copy is when you are saying, hey, pluck these changes I just made for this feature, so that way I can bundle them in a message, that commit message, and then tell my friend, hey, I have a new feature for you that you need to involve in your code when you push them to the remote repository or cloud in the sky, repository, GitHub repo, etc. There's a bit of a disconnect between your laptop and what's on GitHub, and in order for you to align them, you just need to make sure that you push those changes. Then when you try to say, hey, my friend just made a feature, I need to go and download or fetch those changes, then you need to pull them into your local repository. Sometimes you and your friend might have been working on the same function at the same time, or maybe Git sometimes just doesn't like the timeline in which things were made. And so as a result, there's a chance where there might be conflicts simply because it's like, well, which one is the truth? Is it yours? Is it your friend's? Is it both of you? Do you have to merge them? And so once you have merged them successfully, whether it's that you've played them in order, them being commits, those little pockets of save files that you've made through commit messages, which again are bundles of your changed files. Once you put them together, whether again they are played back in a timeline order, or you have to manually go through and say, I want this line and then this line, but only these lines, and we skip this other one. However you merge it, that's how they come back to your working directory. And so that is how you will work with Git. Now, this is a very verbal process so far, and I recognize that it doesn't quite make sense until we're actually doing things. But we will be doing a demonstration of it. You are more than welcome to follow along. And so the goal of doing all these processes of saying, hey, I have these specific changes I want you to bundle up. I'm going to save them in a commit message. This person is going to go pull those changes and then figure out how to smash things together in a way that doesn't introduce issues into our code, into the Git messages, etc. And so that is ensuring that we avoid any conflicts or problems that end up affecting our working directory, which is our own version of the repository. Own version being desktop, laptop, however it is that you're interacting with Git on your personal computing device. So let's actually walk through it. Now, if you don't happen to have Git yet, you can go ahead and navigate to mlh.link/getgit. Y'all have been very active in chat. Oh my goodness. There is a lot to scroll through. Did I miss anything? I don't believe so. You might need to pull your shenanigans to Discord or save for in between streams, just for the sake of making sure folks can ask their questions without feeling like they're interrupting. But I'm glad you all got a chance to catch up and chat. In the meantime, though, mlh.link Git. So if you don't happen to have Git yet, feel free to go ahead and download. I'm currently streaming from a Windows computer. I do mostly do my development on the go on a MacBook. So I am familiar with both sides. There are different ways to install Git, from doing win-get install. I have actually never used this. I, in fact, actually use the GitHub CLI for most of my stuff, which is how I'm going to be demonstrating things for you. But you are welcome to try these installation approaches. For MacBook, I have definitely used Brew. Homebrew, if you don't have it, is just another way to get access to very specific packages that aren't necessarily native to MacBook. That's a very gross oversimplification as usual. But so at the end of it, you should have Git on your built-in terminal if you're using a Mac or Unix, Linux, etc. If you are on Windows, probably using Git Bash, which again, I have the Git Bash through GitHub CLI, I believe. And the way to verify your installation is by typing in Git version into your CLI. Let me make sure. Cool. So let me go pull this onto the screen. So currently, I have a Git Bash window, and I'm trying to zoom in to make sure you all can see it. So again, I already had Git installed, but what I can do is follow some of these instructions and just type Git version. And so right now it's telling me I probably have a very old version for Windows, and yours might be much newer when you get that downloaded. And so, as you can see, I've currently navigated, I personally have a folder called repositories, and that's just where I put all of my GitHub things. Because I'm like, wow, I don't want to go find which clone and which this, and it would be really nice if it was in a central location. This is just how I've started organizing all of my development stuff, because then I can organize from there instead of bloating my documents. That's just a personal preference. You are not obligated to do it this way. And in fact, this folder structure is not necessary for this tutorial. It just helps me keep organized personally. And then, so I've already proved to you that I have an active version of Git. Now, the difference here is that I'm not going to have to authenticate right now, but if you have just downloaded Git, then you may run into a authentication issue, which is where, again, you'd use the GitHub CLI to authenticate. You may have to install it using either Brew or Winget, and you'll have to follow the auth login instructions. Oh no, this is going to resize each and every time. This is brutal. This is so fresh. No, I'm kidding. It's fine. Okay, so in the meantime, let's go ahead and run this clone command. So once you have a GitHub or Git Bash or Git something CLI interface, and we are using CLI because I want to challenge you all. We are in a year of growth, and we are going to not be scared of the terminal. We are going to not fear the repo. It's a very old joke from a very old Git presentation. If you happen to know, Don't Fear the Reaper. It's a good song. I think I may have dated myself. But yeah, so Git clone. Clone is pretty much what it sounds like. We're going to copy something. But normally when we think of copy, if we don't have a technical background, we're going to probably think, oh yeah, just like copy paste, right? And it's very similar to that. But if you just copy paste as a technical person, well, then the question becomes, is it a shallow copy? Is it a deep copy? Is it, some other kind of copy that we could possibly do? And the best way that I can explain this is that Git clone is a deep copy for the most part, where the goal is that you're going to get everything in this repository or project folder, and it's generally going to end with this .git. So I'm not copying it in. I am typing it, which is not recommended. But if you go to any GitHub repo, you can actually type in github.com/mlh/intro-to-git, and it will pull up things. And it will show you how to interact with that, which I will also show you. Because I have this link here, I'm going to do it manually. Obviously, you are introducing yourself to possible spelling errors. And so right now it's saying it's cloning into, it's pulled all these things, and now I'm going to cd into that repository. And so by doing this, I've done cd or change directory. And so you can see now I have this addition of main on my folder structure that it's telling me more information about what's going on. And that means that I'm on the main branch. So very quickly, let's switch over. GitHub.com. I want /mlh/intro-to-git. Okay. So what I want to do is show you the other way you might interact with GitHub, which is that in order to clone something, you might go through this green button code once you're signed in and optimized, and you'll actually just hit copy URL to clipboard on this HTTPS. Now, if you prefer to do it through SSH or through the GitHub CLI, there are obviously different options for you to go ahead and copy or clone your repository. So I didn't go this route because I am familiar with terminal and we don't want to do scary things. But there are multiple ways to engage with GitHub. And so by this point, I'm assuming that you have probably installed the Git and you've probably run into authentication errors, in which case I'm going to leave this slide up for an extra couple seconds. So that way you can go ahead and go get the GitHub CLI in order to authenticate. And that will just say, hey, log into your GitHub. If you don't have an account yet, go make an account. It will help you with getting access to the Student Developer Pack and plenty of other resources. Wow, y'all are really getting it. I must be great at explaining if there's no questions. And again, if you are falling behind and you're shy to ask questions, I totally understand. I get it. Don't be afraid. I won't bite. But you are welcome to see this recording after it's done in case you want to go back and manually go through the slides one by one and really sit there and pull it apart. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Now, what we are actually going to do is we're going to create a first repo. And so I went ahead and, oh yes, this first command, let's go back. This git clone can absolutely be run in a Mac terminal. So you can use it in Mac, you can use it in Windows. The beauty of using any form of Git bash or even the Linux approach is that you can use the same commands. It's so nice. It's very transferable. So yes, you are absolutely correct. Yay, we love that it's super clear for now. Cool. So what I did was I need to zoom in again. Goodness, this is rough on the ego. We're out here doing our best. Okay, so what if we wanted to create a brand new one? So I'm going to go ahead and leave that directory with a cd space .. / specifically. And I'm going to be in my repositories folder. This could be your desktop, your documents, whatever folder it is that you'd like to use to store your repository. And so I'm going to type in mkdir, which is make directory, and I'm going to name it my first repo. And because it's my first repository, at least in this tutorial, even though if we actually did an ls on my repositories, it would be a very long list. So you'll find that you have a bunch of repositories as you get more into development, collaboration, and even just trying to show your work on your portfolio. But I've created this new repository or this new folder. And in order to navigate to that folder, we're going to do a cd my first repo. And now I'm in that folder. But now we have this difference where the intro to Git that we cloned has this main comment at the end, and my first repo doesn't have anything. So what's the difference here? And the difference here is not only is it because intro to Git was cloned, but we don't have anything to tell the repository or the folder that it's supposed to be a repository. And so the way to do that is to type git init. But before I do that, let me show you what this folder looks like. ls-a. Okay, so if I list this out, then there's nothing in this folder except to go up a few folders. Now, if I go ahead and list what's in the intro to Git folder, I need to do a -al. Whoops. If I list what's in there, you'll see that there's this .git folder. And so that's the key difference. There's also the README and whatever else. But the point is we're looking at the .git. It's highlighted in blue and it looks different. So in order to create that Git folder, we just say git init. And so now it says it's initialized an empty Git repository. Now we have the main delineation on our line. And if we run a ls-al here, it should now give us a .git folder. You should never have to go into that folder. Just don't. Just don't. Let it be. Don't touch it. It's okay. It does what it needs to do. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, let's say we wanted to actually make this not in a repository. We're just demoing something. We're like, no. Git was the wrong choice for whatever reason, or we're not ready yet to make a Git repository. You can just delete that folder and you're good. It is no longer a Git repository, but it's not really worth doing that. You can always create a repository and then just never push it to GitHub. So your choice on how you want to interact with Git and therefore GitHub, but there's many ways around it. Okay, so we've initialized our Git repository. Let's keep going. And now I want to add files and make a commit. And we're going to zoom in again. Okay, so if you are using Visual Studio Code, which is another way to interact with your files if you're not comfortable with terminal, but we are in a growth year. We will not be scared of the terminal. In CLI, there are many ways in which you can make a file. Some ways, such as this one, says echo and then things in a quotation mark, and then it pipes it into a readme.md file. And if you don't know what a README file is, it means go read it, because it probably should have instructions, guidelines, installation stuff, any form of information you might need to run this folder, it should be in there. Good READMEs tell you what you can do with the project, how to install things, what you may need to install, and how to just run the project itself in case you have extra commands or you want to make changes to the project to customize it for you. Now, another way that you can create a file and then go in and edit it is to use touch. And so let's say I want to make touch readme.md, and this creates the file, but it doesn't add any of the content into it. So I'm going to quickly remove that readme, and I'm going to instead do the echo, again, quotations, and we're going to name it my first repository. And we're going to pipe that into readme.md. And if we list everything again, README exists again. If I wanted to read the internals of it, I can just do cat readme.md, and it will tell me what's in there. No formatting, no fanciness, nothing. Now, let's say you touched the file, then you can go through Visual Studio Code or your preferred inline editor, such as Vim, Nano, Emacs is not an editor. Who else? There's like a bajillion different things you could possibly do to edit the file in your command line. It's very preference-based. I personally prefer like VI Vim stuff, but that's just me. My partner uses like Nano, and I'm like, Nano is a foreign language. I can't. But the point is, there are many ways to make a file. There's no perfect way to make a file. Depends on your needs. So if you, again, are in Visual Studio Code, which I do have that up somewhere. No, I don't. I forgot. New window. Let's go open that really quick. And then open folder, repositories, my first repo, select folder. So if I open Visual Studio Code, ignoring that welcome page, no, I don't want to update, we have that file that we created. And so again, you can also follow the instructions and use Control-N or Command-N to create your new file, which, voila, new file. This is a file, etc. Save, blah, blah, blah. Lots of different ways to do it. Okay, so moving on next. So there are, again, different ways to interact with Git. There are plenty of ways to at least help yourself out, visualize things, and I'll show you both ways. So if you're in Visual Studio Code, you probably have Git like an extension already, or you might need to go download it. And so let's go pull that up. So as you can see, this is that source control button. Let me zoom in a bunch. And then, ooh. Okay, so we have a source control, and it's telling us, hey, you have one pending change, and that's what that green is telling us here. And if you are finding that you are having difficulty discerning the colors, green and red are not friendly to certain colorblind folks, and so you might personally go and see if you can change things or, again, interact with it in different ways, whether it's settings or through command line, because there's a lot more text involved. But as you can see, it's telling us currently, if I did Control-Shift-G, it'll show us the source control, and there's one pending change. And so let me move this around. It's going to say that we can add things. So let me, there we go. Okay, so now we can open a file, we can discard the changes, which is we could just say, get rid of this. We don't want any of the things that we've just done, or we can stage it, which is that first initial, like we're building up to that commit. We're saying, hey, we want to keep this. We want to make sure other people have access to this. We're preparing to package this up so that way our friend knows, hey, just made a README. I need to go pull my friend's README so I can go add my instructions on how to run the back end, for example, if you ran the front end. And so then with your commit message, you might say, initial commit is a very common first commit, particularly when you are first setting up a repository or a project folder. Another way you might consider is created README. That is a very sufficient commit message. But if you're making changes to it, instead of just saying edited README, you might say added installation instructions to README, or added, or maybe even, usually it's like a verb and then a quick blurb about what you just did and what you're changing in a specific file. If it's a feature, you might say added feature, and there might be keywords that you add to a commit message. Now, there's a couple different types of commits. So you could just say, I just want to make this commit message. We're done here. That's it. It could be that you want to change a past commit, which gives you that option. This is what amend means. You want to change something about it. Commit and push means, hey, when this commit is done, we're going to send that up to the GitHub repository. Everyone's going to have access. Everyone's going to be happy. It's great. And then commit and sync is just making sure, hey, let's also make sure everything is up to date. Let's pull, let's push, let's do everything we got to do. Make sure everything is up to date as possibly can be. So many different options, which is, again, the nice thing of using a UI. And if you choose not to use Visual Studio Code, maybe you want to use Git Kraken, Git Tortoise, Git something. There are so many different UIs out there. You'll have to read the documentation on how to use them. So I will not be doing the commit through Visual Studio Code. I'm actually more comfortable in a terminal. And so let me go pull that up when I remember where that went. There it is. Okay. So we're going to show you what Visual Studio Code did show you, but not with the same process. So if I want to see, hey, what's ready to be committed yet? Like, what do I do? What have I touched? That's a great way to put it. What have I touched? What have I made edits to? Added a space, removed a feature, like added a font, whatever. What have I made changes to? Now, currently it says, hey, you're on the branch named main, which is usually going to be the most common thing that you are producing on, or it might be your working instance of the project and you'll have branches later. And we'll talk more about branches in a bit. But currently it says, hey, you have no commits yet, which means I haven't hit save on my project overall. Sure, I've hit save on my file, and my file exists in my local instance, but no one else has access to it. And so currently it says that it is untracked, where it means that Git has no idea whether it's supposed to pay attention to it or not, which is why it's currently shown in red. So this readme.md is red because it's like, hey, you did things. Do I need to pay attention to that? If so, then you need to say git add and then the file name. And so in order to do that, we'll go ahead and say git add readme.md. Okay, and now it says, hey, your working copy of readme.md. Remember, we're in our working copy in this folder. LF will be replaced by CRLF next time Git touches it. This is a don't care, frankly. In most everything I've ever done, it's a don't care. It just says, hey, that /r/n, because it's a Windows machine, delete. We're going to just change that to just like /n or whatever it is. Windows does weird new line things. Mac and Linux don't. It's a don't care unless there's a very important reason you have LFs. It's just a Unicode character. You don't have to worry about it. So if we do git status again, it'll still say you haven't made a commit yet. Well, of course, all we did was add our file to the staging area. Instead, we have this changes to be committed, and it also says, hey, you have a new file. And now it's in green saying, I'm keeping an eye on that, but we haven't done anything with it. Now, let's say I had, 20 more files and Git was keeping an eye on it. The only time this file will next come back up is if I make another change to it. Let's say I add the installation instructions. If I haven't touched any of the other files when I run git status, it will say, hey, you've made some changes. We should commit this, and it's going to remind you. So it's going to say, hey, if you want to unstage or remove this from your staging area, you're like, I actually am submitting a feature about this other function. The README is not related to this commit message. You can remove this by saying git rm remove -- cached and then the file name. You will not delete your changes. It will still be ready for you to commit at some other point. It will just remove it from the package that you're putting together in order to send things on. And so we'll do that by saying git commit -m because we want to include a message with it. Remember, if we go back to Visual Studio Code, there was that message like form input box. And so I'll add quotations and I'll say created readme.md. And so now it says, hey, there's been a file changed, there's been an insertion. So if you're familiar with GitHub, you can see when lines or code has been added with the plus sign or removed with the minus sign. So if I had, say, removed the first line in the next commit, it would then say like one removal or something like that. So if we run git status again, nothing to commit, working tree clean. Okay, we've committed things, but it's nowhere accessible to all of you. Food for thought. You can commit, but you don't have to push. Let's go back to that Visual Studio Code example. You can see that it is currently saying, hey, you made that file. So even though I did this in the command line, Visual Studio Code will also track those instances because it's using the same .git folder to track everything. So as a result, of course, it makes sense that there's no commits that I need to deal with, but I haven't pushed anything, which means if you were on this repository with me, you would have no idea that this happened, unless I told you, in which case you're like, but I don't see it, because you wouldn't be able to access it because it's still on my local instance of my folder. It is nowhere else. So let's keep going. So as you can see, it says add a commit message. This is what we did. We said commit -m, and we said initial commit or added readme. And in Visual Studio Code, you would just click that commit button, or in the drop-down menu, choose the appropriate choice you wanted to make. So going back to github.com, if you would like to start having access, let's say I had 2 laptops, or I have my desktop that I'm currently streaming on, and I wanted to go pull up my code on my laptop because I'm about to go to class, then I would need to make sure that I have online access. And GitHub is the magic glue that makes this work by ensuring that when you create a new repository and you have access to the repo, whether it's public or private, although in this instance, we'll keep it public, that then you can go ahead and say, hey, I want to go get the code. I can do that online as long as I have Wi-Fi connection. So let's go back to GitHub. So we're not working with this intro to Git yet, but if you were to create a new repository, I went to this plus about 3 buttons from the inside, and I'm going to say new repository. And come on, cooperate. It's not showing me the things that I need for it to work. My computer's acting really slow because I have too many tabs open. What else is new? Okay, so you're creating a new repository, and we don't need to use a repository template, but depending on what we're involved with, there might be a template necessary for a specific project. This can be prominent in the workplace, but if it's just you, no template needed. For me, I'm part of many projects, and so I would want to choose my personal instance, my individual user, and I would want to name it something. So I might say intro to CLI Git, because I'm predominantly working in CLI. And as you can see, intro to CLI Git, let's add a dash, is in fact available. This name change is found based on the repositories that you have in your user. If somebody else names it intro to CLI-Git and it's on their stuff, they will not interfere with my name, which is great. And so you'd go ahead and make it public. You don't have to add a README because we already did, and we don't need a git ignore template, and we don't need a license right now. You can play with these at a later point or see any of our past workshops. I'm pretty sure even I've talked about it in a past intro to Git, which was very unofficial, where it would have we would have talked more about what this means. And so you're going to go ahead and say create repository. So I'm going to go ahead and create it. And so now there's lots of stuff available. Like, whoa, this is too much almost, right? And so we don't need to worry about coding with code spaces. We could add collaborators to this repository. Or if you want to work with it on command line, there are instructions for you, which is a really nice way to start an empty repository. Note, this cheat sheet will never appear if you say add a README, add a .git ignore, add something else, because the moment you add a file, this doesn't need to exist. So let's keep going. So if you are working in the command line, which this is a really convenient way to do it, you can go ahead and clone that repository, much like we did way back when we were cloning the MLH introductory repository. And I already explained how that worked. We're basically making a copy of it, but this is different. Let me go open that since I have it in my... Oh, goodness. Oh, window, open folder, intro to Git, which is the one that I actually wanted to later. Okay, so in the repo that I had initially cloned, you can see that now there's this timeline going on here, which is super nice. So we have an initial commit from row super long ago, but that was where they made their initial commit. Then we have updating the README by adding in a line and then deleting it. And then we have they fixed updated README with success message. So there's a lot going on in these messages, but now we're starting to get information about like, what's this like cloud and this main and all these things. And these are branches. And so VS Code, you can choose what branch you want to be on. So I've actually not used CLI for this. I'm wondering, how do I do that really quick? Bottom left corner, click main. Ah, here it is on the bottom left corner. You're right. I could make a complete new branch. And so you can also do this in a repository that you've set up, where if we went back to the other one, I can do all the remote, hook everything up and make sure everything is connected. And then I can go make new branches. And so you can, again, say, oh, I want to choose a branch. Maybe I wanted to choose the remote branch. Or maybe I want to choose main, which I'm already on. Maybe I wanted to create a new branch. And so you would just follow those instructions. And so in this instance, we are selecting origin main. And we're going to go ahead and keep going. But if you decided that you wanted to check something else out, you would do git branch -M main. And we would want to make any changes that we wanted to do and then add a commit message and sync changes. This is done a little bit differently than the way I did it. That is fine. But quick pause. Have I lost anyone? Because I can see how I might have lost someone in the weird disconnect between working with our own repository to what we just switched to with MLH. So far, nothing. All good so far. Okay, we shall continue. But remember that commit we made? So again, if we'd hooked everything up and made all the connections and made sure things were good to go, then once you push things in the command line interface or you click sync changes, which let's see, perhaps I know a way I can show you. Oh, excellent question. What is a branch? So currently we are on the main branch, which is your original branch by default. Let's say as you are working, you want to deviate or separate and say, I want to test something really quick. And so you branch off from your working tree, your working copy, and you make your changes. And then sometimes you might say, well, that didn't really work. And so you just jump back to your original branch and you kind of ignore anything that happened there. Or let's say, wow, this was a great idea. I want to merge my changes back in. So this is another way of working with Git and GitHub, where you want to start breaking off from your main thing, making your changes, testing things, breaking things until it works, and then bringing it back. And so this is a development pathway, actually. If you're familiar with agile methodologies, there's this idea that says you should always have a working project. Someone should be able to clone your repository and it will just work. They'll follow your instructions, of course. But while you're developing on things, there's a chance you're making commits that are going to break it. And so in order to protect that branch, you have your main and therefore working branch, and then you have your feature branches or bug branches or things where you branch off from the main project, do your thing on the side, decide, do we come back? Yes, no, if so, and then choose appropriately. And so there are different ways that you can jump to different things. So let's try that actually really quick. So what was it to do branches? So if I wanted to say, hey, instead of intro to Git or my first repository or whatever the name was, I want to actually change this to something else, but I want to make sure that it works. Let's say I was making breaking changes. So I can go ahead and create a new branch, and maybe I want to say feature, README feature, maybe feature new README title. And there's different ways you can name things. And so I can hit enter, and now I can switch to a new branch. I can go ahead and make my edits. Let's see. I didn't want to open that. Let's say I'm like, hey, this README is for installation instructions. And I can hit save, and I can make a commit. I don't have to push it. But if I go back to other branches, they won't see this change that I've just made. And so that's the beauty of branches, is that you can make different universes of things, but you can choose on whether or not you want to merge that universe back in, I think is another way to go about it. Which, great question. Turns out that was the next section. Yay me. So branching in another way to understand it is that, whoopsie, whiteboard just fell. So as you can see, currently they have the main branch where they have script.js, and so it's repeating some asterisks for you. But if you wanted to change it for some reason or make a feature branch, you would just branch off. And then when you are ready to bring it back, you would add a code review. And so this process is going to be merging things back together. Depending on your development approach, you might just say merge, and then you're good. And that's often the case when you are working by yourself. If you are working with other people or you've forked a repo instead of cloning it, sometimes even developer pathways, when you've cloned it, will ask for a pull request when you've made changes, where the goal is to say, hey, I noticed that you were using const, but we're changing the value, so we actually want to use let. Or maybe you want to rename something, as currently here it's saying, yeah, the variable name isn't the best. We want to make sure that this code is readable for the future, and that if we come back to it, we know why we were naming something some way. And so the way that you would add it back in is with a PR or merge or both, which PR technically is still a merge. It's just more, not bureaucracy, but like more input and feedback on how to improve the code, such that it can be merged back in. So you again always have working code. So you can see now from this three, in the first green one on the left, where it's just on the main branch, all it was doing was repeating the asterisk symbol. But if we ever wanted to change it, now we can with this feature that we've done on our own development, tested it out, and then brought it back to the main development branch. Okay, so collaborating. I don't think we have time for this, unfortunately, but this might be something for you to try on your own, where let's say you have a friend that you are currently watching a stream with, or that you can send them a message or a DM, or even use Discord and say, hey, I want to try out that collaboration in the slides. Kind of. That's a great question, which is a great way to work with this. If you are doing a pull request, you need to get at least one approval unless you've changed the settings for the repository or the expectations for the PR. If you say everyone must approve, then that's your criteria. But if you say, oh, I only need 2 approved code reviews, then you only need 2 of your, say, 4 team members. And so that's very much a question that you need to figure out of what is the best way to do things. Ooh, we will not have time for this, but I can talk you through it. Because I can't actually get this to work in the next 5 minutes. But I've done it before, so I can definitely talk about it. Let's get you started on this like homework if you want, where if you wanted to collaborate with someone, choose which one of your repositories to use. Just start a basic README like we kind of did. Make the connections following the instructions on when you created that new GitHub repo, which let me go pull up. And I'm keeping the question up so that way I can remember to come back to it, because otherwise I'm not going to remember. Where is it? Where's the GitHub link? Did I close it? No, I closed it. Oh no. A plus me. GitHub.com. Intro. There we go. Okay. So if you follow these instructions, it'll teach you everything you need to know to make all the connections you need to make. And choose one of the 2, give them access as a collaborator, and then make sure that the person who wasn't selected their repo has gone ahead and cloned that repository. Make your commit messages, and then try and push. You may run into a merge conflict depending on things. So with the next step, of course, you'd make the changes, say, oh, partner 1 changes, commit, and then push them. And receiving an error here is in fact intentional. This is your first merge conflict. Very scary, but worth working through, because then you can start figuring out, well, whose change do you keep? And so of the 2 that you keep, you might say, well, oh, here's a great example, actually. So let's say you wanted to change the fruit list, and somebody else has changed it to watermelon, apple, and banana instead of mango, apple, and banana. But Lisa has changed it to pineapple, orange, and banana. So now you're going to have a conflict because these changes have happened in almost basically the same time. And so when they each try to update themselves, there's going to be some confusion because Git can only handle so much, where it's like, well, what do I do with it? Who do I choose first? Who's more important? Which one's right? Oh no, and it flips out. And so as a result, you want to make sure that you choose the correct change, whether it's both of them or one or the other. And so you'll have a merge conflict where there'll be some icons to help you out, where it'll be a bunch of equal signs and then either a greater than or less than sign to basically say, hey, here's the changes. Pick which one's right. And so this is what it looks like, where you have, you have all those less than signs to be what's the change that's coming. And then you also have an equal sign to say, hey, here's the difference between the 2. Which one do we keep? And so to resolve it, you'll need to make sure that you remove the conflict markers, that you commit the change, because otherwise Git's going to be like, well, you didn't fix it. So it won't recognize that you fixed the merge conflict until you make the commit saying, here's how I fixed it, and you've removed the conflict markers. If you don't remove them, Git's going to be like, yo, you still have a conflict. I will not proceed. And then talk more about how you might do it on purpose, so that way you can prevent it in the future, or just have good communication about it. But let's talk about forking a repo real fast. So let's see. Will you let me? No. Let's go to Okay, this is a good way to do it. All right, so I'm on the MLH Intro to Git repo. If I didn't have edit access in this repository, then I want to fork it because currently I have access, so I can clone it. But what if you don't? And chances are you might not. So you would go ahead and you would fork your own copy of MLH/intro to Git. And so what this looks like on your profile is now you're going to have your username/intro to Git. And so I'm not going to actually do this part, but you'll have your own version. And then you can clone the repository in such a way that you can then make edits. You should actually still be able to clone, you just can't make changes to it. And so forks are often used to, that was my mistake. My brain just like checked out for a half second. When you have forked a project, you've made your changes, you've made commits, and you're like, hey, I want the original user to look at my changes. I want to help them out. It's an open source project. I think they could really benefit from these README updates, these link changes, this whole code that makes it more efficient, whatever. Read the project's contribution rules before you make a PR, because chances are there's going to be instructions on how you can make a pull request that's going to be reviewed, that's going to be treated seriously, and that's going to be considered for actual involvement in the code. And so when you go make a PR, you'll say, I want to make a new pull request. And depending on if there's instructions and which branches you're using, where if I had forked this, I would actually be able to choose my version, Halcyon Aura / intro to MLA, intro to Git, and then their version, MLH's intro to Git. And then I would be able to say, hey, pull this branch of changes in, and here's information about it. Here's how I tested it. And here's what you should consider. And so then you'll go through a code review if it's a reputable repository, instead of just saying, yes, accept. They'll go through, they'll say, hey, your code could be written better here, here, and here. What was going on here? I want to make sure I understand. So a good conversation will help the code be better. And then on their side, so let's say MLH is like, yeah, your changes were pretty good. We'll go ahead and hit accept. And so once they've accepted the pull request, it's the code repository's owner's job to make sure that it gets merged in successfully. So usually there'll be a quick check saying, hey, there's no merge conflicts, you're good to go, whatever. But the owner has to be the one to say, yes, good. Or any of the collaborators who have admin access to say, yes, we can merge this PR. And so this can happen whether you are a cloned repository and you have edit access, you have a cloned repository with no edit access, in which case you need to fork it. And I think that's about it. So very, very visual. That is something that I will take as feedback back to the team to showcase maybe how we might merge something in as part of this presentation. But we are at time. I do know that Wiki Races is right up in Discord right now. And so we are pretty much done, but I want to make sure that before you head out, you take a chance to give us some feedback. I know we spent a really long time on explaining things, but it is a complex topic sometimes, and this is the beginning of the workshop week. So come back to this workshop as many times as you need to. And if you still find me confusing, I know we have past instances of our intro to Git, but definitely leave feedback on where we can improve. That question on merging a PR from a forked repo is a great example that we might put back into this workshop or put in a separate workshop as part of a later Global Hack Week. So let me pull that link in case I don't have access to it right now. So I'm going to do the QR code so I can type it in. Copy. Send to myself. Alrighty. I'm working on getting that workshop link. Just hang on. I promise I came prepared. I did. That was the one link I forgot. Copy link. All right. Yeah, one last time, go ahead and fill out that workshop survey. Tell us how we can improve so we can make sure you get the most amount of learning in the time that we have. And again, Wei and Charbel, I believe, are hosting Wiki Races in Discord right now. But don't forget to check into their workshop. Check out later workshops throughout the week. Make sure you check into those. And yeah, I think I'll actually be back in about an hour with another workshop. But in the meantime, if you have a chance to take a break, please do. Drink water, eat, all that jazz. And we'll see you when we see you. Thanks for joining. Not yet, but you can always rewatch this workshop back on youtube.com/Major League Hacking, and you can see the recordings to watch this over again and get access to those slides and the links that we mentioned. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and drop off and take a break myself. Form is showing Beginners Week. Good to know. Go ahead and fill it out anyway. I will have it fixed in the background. Thanks so much for letting us know. Alrighty, bye y'all. Enjoy wiki races, and if not, definitely remember to take a break. This is a lot of information to just drink from a fire hose from.